Hello and welcome back, everybody. Hope you've had your short little break. So, diving straight back into the program. And next up, we have lovely Ros, who I've known for some time and has done lots of great stuff across the Type 1 community. Ros has also been part of a program that we did called Artist, which was great and great contributions there. But Ros has kindly given up her time today and committed lots of time in the planning of today, despite having her beautiful little baby in June this year. So an extra shout out for not only for Ros, but for her little baby as well. So Ros, over to you.
Hi, and welcome to the Diabetes and Pregnancy at Pandemic Times story session with me, Ros Gray. Just before I begin my talk, I'd just like to say that although I'm an infusion and training specialist with Roche Diabetes Care, today I'm speaking to you as a person with type 1 diabetes, and I'm not representing my employer. Therefore, any information shared is given as a personal opinion, and I am not sharing on behalf of Roche Diabetes Care. That's exactly the same with anything that I share across my social media platforms as Type 1 Adventures. Anyway, on to today's talk. I wanted to just set the scene just before I go into the parts about type 1 diabetes and pregnancy, and just give you a little bit of background to myself and context. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in the early 80s, and this was just after I'd started walking as a baby. My rubbish claim to fame at the time is that I was the youngest person in the local area to have type 1 diabetes, although I know this has changed quite a lot in more recent years. I started off on just one injection a day, which is, again, very different to how people find that their diabetes is treated in the early days of since diagnosis. And this actually carried on for me until I was 6 years old, when it was only then did I move on to 2 injections a day. This was a mixed insulin, so a mix of cloudy and clear for those of you who were using injections in the 1980s, so a bit of background insulin and a bit of fast-acting insulin. I didn't actually start onto multiple daily injections until I was close to 16 years old, so it was quite a substantial time being on just 2 injections a day. And actually through all of this time, the only bit of technology I was really using was a blood glucose meter. I eventually started a carb counting course in my late 20s, and this was actually the first bit of education that I'd done myself, which is aimed at me as a person with type 1 diabetes rather than my parents doing all the learning. This course was a huge eye-opener for me and definitely started me on the road to diabetes technology. Just to give you an idea, through all of this time, the technology, as I said, was based all around blood glucose monitoring. And those images there just show the types of injections that I was on in the early days. And that blood glucose meter there, which was my first blood glucose meter, took 3.5 minutes to check your blood sugars, which as a baby, can you imagine that 3.5 minutes was really long for my parents waiting to find out if I was having a hypo or not. Okay, so just moving on a little bit then to peer support and my journey into technology. Although I was just getting started when I did the carb counting course and finding out more information about diabetes technology, I had a sudden change out of the blue with my diabetes, and I started to suddenly become insulin sensitive. And to this day, we're not really sure what caused that. But the result of that was that I was on half the dose of background or basal insulin compared to when I was in my late teens. This sudden change, though, actually made me want to find out more about diabetes technology and to find out what the latest things that were going on. And after a couple of events that I attended locally relating to diabetes and type 1 diabetes, I was told by a group of people about the GB Doc, or the Great British Diabetes Online Community, and I discovered the huge importance and significance of peer support. Through various groups then that I started following and joined, and I heard about and discussed with various people, I found out about things that were coming along in the world of diabetes, from trend graphs and sensors and things which I had not heard anything about previously, down to pump guidelines and criteria. And although I knew about pump therapy, I didn't really know whether that was something that I wanted. So I started to look into things like the NICE guidelines and the criteria. And after buying some sensors to track my blood sugars for about a month, I shared this information with my team. And they decided that actually pump therapy was something that I could probably do with, due to the severity of the hypos that I was having, particularly at night, and the fact that I was doing about 12 to 15 injections a day. So I was really, really grateful when they said that I qualified for a pump. So I started on the pump, and again, although there was a whole lot of learning with that, it was a huge game changer for me. The fact that I could do tiny amounts of insulin to match the sensitivity, or to completely suspend my insulin, was just mind-blowing. But it didn't mean that I wanted to stop learning. I wanted to find out more. So fast forward about 5 years or so, and after educating myself about the closed loop systems at various events, from different people's blogs, papers and research, and mainly having huge lengthy discussions with my team, I decided to venture into the world of closed looping for myself. Although it's been an absolute life-changing thing for me to go onto a closed loop system, I will say that it takes a whole lot of dedication, and it isn't a fix for diabetes, as some people would hope, but it does feel a whole lot closer to what your body should naturally be doing in terms of delivering insulin. Okay, so probably you're asking, where does pregnancy fit into this? Well, when I first thought about pregnancy, I was taken back to my clinic appointments, and I don't know if it was the same for anybody else or any other ladies who've got type 1 diabetes, but I felt like I was asked at pretty much every appointment whether I was thinking about having a child or was going to have a baby after I hit a certain age, or if the team found out I was in a relationship. Now, although I knew that there was a link with diabetes and pregnancy, and I knew that why in some ways what they were asking, I'm not sure I really knew the importance of why they were asking. So I, to be honest, didn't really think much of it until I was given a leaflet in one of my clinic appointments, where they went into the impact of diabetes on pregnancy and what that meant in terms of the mum having a lower HbA1c and a stable HbA1c through the pregnancy, and what that impact had for both the mum and baby. So having read that definitely opened my eyes a bit. And so I was really grateful for the technology that I had on hand to be able to look and make adjustments. And that was really, really important when I found out that I was pregnant. Being able to contact the team and to discuss in step-by-step stages what I needed to do was really significant. And particularly as the adjustments needed to happen from the moment I found out, to be perfectly honest, it was an overnight change that was needed, and it was quite drastic. Also, I was also quite well established on my closed loop journey, which is not something I would recommend that people just start closed looping when they find out they're pregnant. This was something that I had done for quite a while before I found out I was pregnant. And having already been on that, I knew that there were going to be a lot of adjustments that I needed to make, but that the technology could help me make those a lot easier. And again, as I mentioned previously, peer support was still significant. I knew that just because I had the technology to hand didn't mean that those things were going to go away. I still needed the support of people who had been through pregnancy with type 1 diabetes, those who had maybe already had a little one and could share their experience looking backwards, but also find out about people who were pregnant at the same time as me and were experiencing the same things. So technology in a different way through the world of social media connected me with people to help through those stages. So the next big thing I think to think about is, what's the real deal? You know, what is it actually like to have type 1 diabetes and be pregnant versus what it says in all the papers, what is recommended, and the planning versus the reality. After discovering I was pregnant and trying to read everything I could, in reality, it was the technology that helped me more than anything. During the first trimester, hypos, which most people with type 1 diabetes have, being able to set different targets, adjust my ratios, and to just look at everything retrospectively and to plan moving forward was just so much easier having all of those things at my fingertips. Equally, so I probably should mention, I was pregnant during the pandemic. So pandemic reviews meant that I wasn't having my normal clinic appointments. I wasn't going into the centre. In fact, I didn't actually see anybody face to face for the whole of my first trimester and into the beginning of my second trimester. So the fact that I could speak to people over Zoom or over the telephone and they could see the information about my type 1 diabetes in the cloud was invaluable. It was really important that they could access those things straight away and we could discuss those in the moment and make decisions together. I won't take away, though, from the support networks. As mentioned, peer support was really important, but also the support of family and friends around me who were seeing the changes and things that were going on every day. It was really important that I had those things, particularly as I went through the different trimesters. The adjustments that I needed to make in relation to my diabetes during those trimesters was crazy. In the first trimester, I was on substantially less insulin than I was before I was pregnant. And then by the third trimester, and just before I was giving birth, almost double the insulin. And all of those things don't just happen at set times. They happen out of the blue. So you need to keep reviewing and checking and planning what you're doing and discussing those things with your team. So again, the value of technology in that during the pandemic was really important. But particularly as I had to make some of those adjustments on my own in between those calls, and I could see and reflect on what was working well and what needed to change as well. Although I keep mentioning, as you've seen there's a couple of times on the slide, planning is really, really important. And I don't think you can take away from the fact that planning is significant prior to pregnancy in terms of trying to have a stable HbA1c, but also the planning for the different parts of the pregnancy journey through the different trimesters. I do recognise that not everybody is in that same position. Not everybody has that notice in terms of pregnancy when they find out that they're pregnant. And also the fact that with all the best plans, quite often your plans need to change. And that recognising that you're not in control of everything. Despite the fact that I had managed to have a really healthy pregnancy, I'd managed to basically be well through all of it. I'd managed to keep my diabetes as stable as I possibly could, and my baby was in the normal weight range. I unfortunately didn't avoid having a C-section, and that wasn't something that I really wanted. However, by having a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C that I'd discussed with the team prior to going into give birth, it meant that those changes were more of a choice rather than feeling it's something that was forced upon me. So it's definitely really beneficial to have those conversations early and to plan together what might happen, not just what you want to happen. Okay, so in terms of any top tips, I wrote an article for Diabetes UK during Diabetes Week earlier this year where there were a few different tips. And you're probably going to guess my top one, which is planning. Planning definitely helps. We're not always in a position to plan your pregnancy out way in advance, but work with your team to discuss those things early and to discuss as soon as you find out that you're pregnant, because there's lots of planning throughout the pregnancy, not just before. The other thing that I found really significant, and particularly as I was during the pandemic, was that exercise is key. At one point, we were only able to go out for exercise, and so I really made the most of that. That really helped with my diabetes and being able to get outdoors, and just for both your mental health and also for your diabetes management, getting outside and exercising every day really helped, and definitely for me made my pregnancy journey a lot smoother. Don't do it alone. That's my third tip. Peer support is always important, but also speaking to other people who are pregnant, ladies who've got type 1 in particular, was really beneficial, as well as your team. Keep your team involved, which is my fourth tip. So by involving both your family, your friends, those that you might not even know on social media, and your team, it was so important to me to get all of those people involved so that I could plan for the next stages that were coming in my pregnancy. But finally, I will say, don't beat yourself up. Sometimes things don't go to plan. You will have the random high blood sugars that come out of nowhere that you just don't know why that's happened. But don't beat yourself up. Just keep trying and keep working on the things that you can control. Although this all sounds exhausting, I will say that it was absolutely worth it. And at the end of a really busy day, or a busy trimester, or a busy whole pregnancy where you've been planning and doing things non-stop, it is all totally worth it when you're holding your little one in your hands. And that is the thing that I would always keep in mind if you're struggling at any point, remembering why you're doing this and what it's all been aimed for. So I hope you found this helpful. And if you've got any questions, I'll be available at the Q&A session later. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ros. Absolutely perfectly put. Pregnancy during these very tough times of the pandemic and how useful it's been, and great to hear your story as ever. As mentioned, Ros will be available on the Q&A panel, so if you've got any questions, do leave it for then.